Welcome back to another episode of The Vitko Verdict, and the final part of our Thorium series. What started off as a simple question and answer session turned into a full-blown presentation and a deep dive into some of the conspiracies behind the government suppression of thorium technology. What you will find as we get into some of these so-called conspiracies is that they have a lot more weight behind them than they first appear. What you'll soon find out is when you take a closer look at what's going on, follow the money, and see who's really behind all this, one organization keeps coming up: the Federal Reserve. So if you didn't have enough reasons already on why the Federal Reserve should be abolished, I'm about to give you a bunch more. If you haven't yet, please go check out parts 1 and 2, linked below. And without further ado, let's get into the final part of Thorium's Atlas Shrugged moment: the fuel the government tried to hide.
All right. Well, we've done part one, the thorium story, part two, Atlas Shrugged code. Now, part three, which questions and answers. Some questions were posed to me, and it helped trigger a number of things so I could actually improve the earlier two parts, and now we'll address the questions. There were 10 of them. Question one: what would you say the main reason you think thorium still hasn't been adopted by the U.S. today? The Federal Reserve. I'll get into it a little bit. The thorium molten salt reactor conflict with banksters began February 2nd, 1942 at 9:44 p.m. when Glenn Seaborg first made the $500 quadrillion fission energy discovery. If you have a technology that's going to make $500 quadrillion, that means somebody else isn't going to. It's competition. That is a red flag that it's got to be stopped. Some would believe. Battle lines would be drawn for and against thorium. I've put this what I call chutes and ladders together. If you've ever played chutes and ladders, if you get to a certain spot, you get to climb. But if you step on a slide, you slide your way out of the game. We're going to get into who were the players and what was transpiring. So, and I call it puppet gate because with the Federal Reserve, with all the money they can create, they buy the media, White House, Congress, real estate. You have all this private money to bribe and control CIA, industrial complex. All this is tied into the Federal Reserve. That's why it's. Remember, I talked in an earlier section, the wasp sticking an egg in a spider and slowly eating it from inside out. Sadly, the Federal Reserve, the thousand-year history I showed in an earlier segment, they've been dining on prosperous countries throughout the millennia. So, in the battle lines, we had the Thorium All-Star Group versus what I call the global bankster puppets. And you'll see, for instance, like Churchill is on here and a number of Democrats and Republicans. Anyway, we'll continue. And I want to mention there was an amazing four-part article, Follow the Yellow Brick Road from Harvard to Enron by Linda Miner. She was with Enron collapsing. She was trying to find out what led to it, and like the Wizard of Oz, who was the wizard behind the curtain? She thought it was one particular person, and I wish I could have contacted her when she's writing this because she thought it was some guy named Pudge, but she wrote a lot about a guy named Edward Pauley, who's over here, Wendell Pauley. He was the true puppet master. He was the guy behind the curtain. But what she also detailed was when he died, all his wealth went back to the city of London. He was an agent for them, so he was essentially a traitor to this country. But anyway, we'll continue this. So Edward Pawley is tied into the city of London. They are the banksters of the world. The first thing they did, State Department treason to assure uranium nuclear arms race in 1993. What kind of treason did they do? And I know this is going to blow some people away. There's a William Averill Harriman. He was special envoy to Russia on April 29th, 1943. This is about a year after thorium was discovered, and we're working on the Manhattan Project. During the highly secretive Manhattan Project, Special Ambassador W. Averill Harriman shipped uranium oxide, uranium nitrate, and uranium metal to Russia to secretly launch the Soviet atomic program. I think it was the Roseburgs that got executed. They said they were the ones that gave Russia the atomic bomb. They gave them the electric chair. He got medals in government for being such a phenomenal person. Well, to add insult to injury, the State Department was ordered by Harriman and Dexter White, who was involved with the economics program for this country, anyway, to send Moscow currency printing plates on January 29, 1944, to fund the atomic arms race against America with Federal Reserve notes. The plates and the 300 million they produced to run their atomic nuclear program, it was equivalent to about $5 billion a day in turn dollars. They purposely gave Russia all this stuff, uranium, to make certain there was going to be an arms race, which would help them defeat thorium, because you can't make bombs from thorium. Once the Russians are making headway on nuclear bombs, then it's easier for the bad guys to say, we can't go with thorium, we have to go with uranium because we need the waste materials to make bombs. And the global banksters over the lifespan would make about $9 trillion in weapons. That's just on the American side. Hell, I don't know how much money was fed to the Russians to make them the ogres of the 20th century. So that's one of the major things that most people aren't aware of, and there's a lot of documentation I have supporting that. So Edward Pawley again is involved in that. There was a book called The Irregulars by Janet Constant. Her husband was on 60 Minutes. They had discovered file cabinets hidden behind a wall in a law firm in Washington, D.C. When they opened it up, they found the records of Ronald Dahl, who did Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and so forth. He was RAF, and when he was shot down and couldn't fly anymore, they sent him over here in the 40s, and he was rubbing shoulders with Roosevelt and all the powers of Washington, D.C., and he was a good-looking guy. All the women were jumping his bones. Interesting novel. Anyway, the key thing is, from the book, we discovered Edward Pawley was working with Churchill that they needed to get Vice President Wallace out, because they knew by hook or crook Franklin Delano Roosevelt wasn't going to survive his fourth term because he had announced that he was going to try to end the British Empire. And there's documents and historical stuff where he warned Churchill that, when the war's over, I'm going to help free up the oil state, oil countries, and other things that you have enslaved. Roosevelt didn't know that Churchill has more kills, assassinations than Hillary Clinton. So you don't mess with either of them. Anyway, so those two working together, Pauly and Winston Churchill, they set Henry Wallace up for trips overseas where they purposely made him look like a buffoon, did all things to sabotage him the 8 or 9 months he was away so that they could bring in Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman is another haberdasher like Chester Holyfield. Only a high school education, a bankrupt like Chester Holyfield was in the haberdasher business, and he worked for the mafia, Missouri mafia, and anyway, they took Henry Wallace out and put Harry S. Truman in, and lo and behold, Roosevelt dies in the fourth term, about 30 or 40 days into the new term. So Truman takes over. There's no vice president. They didn't set up that rule yet. So it ended up Edward Pauly was part of his secret kitchen cabinet. He had a back door to get in there, and he was pretty much telling Truman what to do. So now, see, they have to slowly exterminate all the people on the thorium side if they're going to kill this. And so now they bring in Prescott Bush, Republican. Some people think he's the father of George H.W. Bush, but my understanding, he's really the uncle. George H.W. Bush, his real name from Germany was Schur. He was born over there. His father and him and his mother came over here, but they were not U.S. citizens. So if people bitch about Obama, George W. Bush, George H. Wasn't a citizen either. Anyway, there's a dilemma because they gotta take Jerry Voorhis out, Kid Atlas, and they've tried several times. Now Edward Pauly can't get involved in trying to take him out because they're both Democrats. So what does he do? He calls his buddy from the East Coast, Prescott Bush, and says, hey, we got to take this guy out or he's going to destroy the oil industry and the banking industry. And so they put an ad out here. This is the actual ad. Wanted, desperate politician to do despicable things for cash. Apply in writing to Prescott Bush with part of Brown Brothers Harriman. Notice the name Harriman again. These Harrimans and Bushes and so forth, they're all of the same side as you see over here. Anyway, so now I've mentioned to you that Jerry Voorhis, he was always helping the common man, and the national media called him Kid Atlas because he put all the little people on his shoulder, and but he was a kid at the time, so he wasn't a full adult Atlas. So anyway, that's what his nickname was. The guy they recruited got a nickname too from all the dirty, underhanded things they did. You want to guess what the nickname was?
What is it? I'm not sure.
Tricky Dick.
Sure.
Richard Nixon. There he is, naval commander. I heard he was an excellent poker player, an honest, excellent poker player. Anyway, so they bring him in, and he did all the despicable things for cash. And So Jerry Voorhis is knocked out. So as you can see, over time they're attacking the All-Star Thorium team. And at the same time, for instance, like with Chester Holyfield, he's winning term after term because he's in an oil sweet spot in Los Angeles. He's winning by with 95% of the vote. They just need him to keep winning so that he moves up the ranks in Congress to where eventually he can become chairman of 2 or 3 different powerful organizations. And that's why he becomes the almost the king of Washington D.C. So anyhow, we'll continue on. So once they got rid of Jerry Voorhis and they took over a lot of Congress, that's when they passed the Atomic Energy Act that you can't say anything about nuclear energy unless it's in the book that we're publishing, and that book will not have thorium in it. And once they put that book in, Alvin Weinberg's mentor, Eugene Wigner, he's wise enough to know, holy crap, if I stay here, I'm a marked man. He said, the hell with that, and he said goodbye to Alvin. Alvin, you take over Oak Ridge National Laboratories. I'm going back to Princeton. He was old enough to know he didn't want to get involved in that politics, so Eugene Wigner left. He's one of the characters in the book that with John Galt had a mentor at the laboratory that he loved and cherished, and it was the same relationship here. So Alvin was sad to see Eugene Wigner leave. And then they passed the National Security Act in 47, so now they could protect themselves. If anyone came with any accusations, they could just go to the courts and say, hey, it's national security. We're not saying innocent or guilty. It's just you got to drop it. And so they put that in. And once they put that in, now J. Edgar Hoover and Dulles, CIA, they went after Robert Oppenheimer, who was a true patriot, and his equivalent in the book is Hank Reardon. And the courts were always after Hank Reardon, and you'll see there's trials with him and how horrible the courts were with him and so forth. Same thing happened to Robert Oppenheimer, and so they got him delisted from security in 1953. So he's gone. Then they passed the Secret Patents Act, 1951. One of the first ones they're going to knock off, if it proves to work, will be the thorium. That the act says essentially oil is national security since it's so fundamental to all the revenues and everything else here. If something knocks it off, that's a national security risk. So anything that threatens oil could fall under the Secret Patent Act. That, sorry, you can't use it and you can't talk about it for 50 years. So that kind of crap's going on. So why nations fail? So let's look at that National Security Act to a certain degree. In Why Nations Fail, the author warned that secret government partnerships with big business monopolies, they ultimately lead a nation's failure if not checked and cast aside. And my question was, is there any congressional legislation cloaked under the 1947 National Security Act which arrests and imprisons inventors who refuse to cease their pursuing of patent and commercialization of any invention or technology which might upset the status quo of international banker monopolies? And the answer is yes. U.S. Code 181, secrecy of certain inventions and withholding patent. Here's some of the information on it. Here's 1 through 8, secrecy of certain inventions, abandonment, right of compensation, if there is any, the penalties, yada, yada, yada. And I've listed links where people can go right to it to see it if they're saying No way. And I say, way. Sensitivity application warning system. That's another part of this. Essentially, and here's the form. The SAWS Act was designed to assist in assessing the patent application identified claiming subject matter of special interest. Government can look over patents and so forth and say, oh no, we don't want that to the public. We're going to use it ourselves and we don't necessarily have to compensate you. So the U.S. Patent Office has been using a secret system to withhold the approval of applications having to do with items such as free energy and anti-gravity, or a number of other inventions that appear to violate the known laws of physics. Uh, the only reason they violate the known laws of physics is J.P. Morgan back around 1900. He realized some of the stuff Nikola Tesla was working on, free energy, could destroy the oil industry and so forth. He actually went to the colleges, he and his people, and with the I'm trying to remember the law. I'll remember at some point. Anyway, he gave the colleges a lot of money. These are science departments. If they would change, Maxwell's equation. There's some time elements on Maxwell's equation, and they were to be eliminated so that you couldn't use physics to show that these free energy things can work. So there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes over time. And so I just wanted to point out here again where what they're concerned about and they're going to stop is perpetual motion machines. They can work. Patent offices won't allow them because they're bought. The patent offices are part of the deep state. Anti-gravity devices, room temperature, superconductivity, free energy. All these things, if they pop up, there's a signal out, and then they go after to either buy out the inventor, imprison him, or threaten him to where he has to remain quiet. And this has really been going on far longer. When the Tartarian Empire was destroyed, they had wireless electricity and a bunch of things, and that's what's in Ayn Rand's book Anthem. That again, if there's limited energy, it's expensive and they can control you. And it's got to be centralized. They don't want energy at individual houses and so forth. So there's a lot going on there. Here's the actual U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. This is the secrecy order that's delivered to the person it suits. I'm just going to show it here. I'm not going to go through it so we can move along. But anyone looking at this, they can freeze it and see the information. Now, how many suppressions are there? Well, when I did this presentation in 2024, I had up to the year 21, and it was 5,976 items that had been suppressed from going forward under the Secrecy Act. And you can see how many of them are related to different militaries and so forth. This data was obtained from U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and maintained at Federal American Scientists. There's a link of how to get there if people want to see updates. As of the end of 2025, when I went there, there's now 6,543 secret orders in effect on patent applications under the 1951 law. And I'll just leave this up here, but not get into it. Just let it be there for a few moments so people can freeze it if they want to look at it, and we'll continue on. Additional published papers on thorium and other energy technologies secretly banned from America. As of the end of 25, as we said earlier, there's over 6,500. Now, I've published a lot of articles under the anonymous Patriot Condor at American Intelligence Media. Now, American Intelligence Media, they have been taken out a few years ago by the deep state, but a lot of the articles are still there if you happen to look for uh, uh, the anonymous Patriot Condor, and if you type in Galt or something like that, some stuff still pops up. So I've done articles there on free energy revolution. That was 2017. Abundant energy for everyone on Earth. Uh, Remember, thorium is named after the Norwegian god Thor, and there's Thor's hammer. So anyway, but I've given links to those locations. And again, I just want to give a real physical example of some of the things that go on. So we're going to look at something related to anti-gravity. I might add, we're still on question one, but the others won't be as long as this. uh, uh, so we're going to look at something related to anti-gravity. This is my hope with Trump in the second term. During his first term, with the disclosure of anti-gravity to public in April 2019, I hope thousands of breakthrough technologies suppressed by global criminal cartels would begin transitioning America away from the world of the Flintstones to the welcoming world of the Jetsons by the late 2020s. I thought if he had been in also from 20 to 24, that might have happened. But anyway, here is an actual anti-gravity spaceship that's being loaded right now. It's the TR-3B. You see people loading stuff onto it. It has a mercury membrane. When it's under 20,000 psi, it creates a warp field around the ship, and anyone on the ship, your mass decreases like 98%. If you stepped on it 200 pounds for turns and speeds and all that, you're only 4 pounds. So, and there's actually patents released that show how the system works. But because people don't see it on TV and on the news, it's called the Tavistock syndrome. They've trained people, if you don't see it on the local news or on the national news, it must be fake. Whereas you should think the opposite. If it is on the national news or local news, anything but the weather, it is probably fake. Based on the 2017 secret military patents now officially released on the internet, President Trump was successful breaching the wall of secrecy involving a breakaway space program. The Navy recently released its secret patents on anti-gravity propulsion and startling information on some of the spacecraft, which has been using the technology since October 1954. And here's a link to the information. But I want to go one step further. Let's hear what they have to say. This is a 2017 congressional hearing at Link, where Congress was informed that we have anti-gravity since 1954.
In October of 1954, a key date I want the committee to remember, we have actionable intelligence from someone who has worked in the National Security Agency and has been in the vault. All of this went deep black because they figured out at that point gravity control. So since 1954, October of that year, we have not needed rockets, jets, internal combustion engines, and surface roadways between cities.
But that would put the oil industry out of business, which would put the bankers out of business. And so I was 2 years old. Well, given my age. Anyway, it's just one of those things. Life is amazing. I'm always learning new stuff every day. Sometimes people say, have you tried this game or that game and so forth? I said, man, life is a game. It is so amazing that I don't have time to look at some of those distractions. And also given testimony in support of inexpensive hydropower for Mainers here. They're blowing up dams here because it's hurting some fish. There's other ways to take care of the fish. It's just they're trying everything possible to put in solar and wind. We go to a climate downturn where there'll be snow on panels and the windmills won't work. A lot of people will be freezing to death, and so we need these technologies to come forward as soon as possible, because by the mid-30s we should be right significantly into a really cold spell. But anyway, I've given testimony in some of these legislative meetings. Here was the thorium one that Senator Eric Brakey was a sponsor of, and I spoke at it. We even flew people in at our own expense from Ohio to give insight and information to the committee members. And there's a link to the documents. The summary from my paper, I said in 1972, America was on the verge of leading the world in atomic energy era with thorium chemical reactors. All evidence presently indicates rogue politicians within the federal government energy agencies successfully blasted America back to the petroleum age. Since the betrayal of energy policy by a corrupt system, the federal government has wandered aimlessly in the energy wilderness for the last 43 years. This is speaking in 2015. International countries are now in a race to build the patents of the first 21st century thorium chemical reactors by the mid-20s. The United States thorium industry continues to battle corrupt federal legislation from 1974 that keeps America handcuffed to the starting line. Now, I said in 2015, by the mid-20s, there would be countries out with the molten salt thorium reactors. Right, as I said, 2025, China has come out with molten salt thorium reactor. Norway has come out with a reactor too. So I feel sometimes like the Cassandra syndrome, given the gift of prophecy, but the curse that no one will believe you until it's too late. Cassandra tried to warn the Trojans against the Greeks and their horse that came into the city of Troy. So anyway, if American exceptionalism is going to lead the world in thorium energy development, we need the government to remove artificial barriers put in place back to 1974, educate the American public on how they were purposely turned against atomic energy, to allow state rights in partnership with private enterprise to advance inexpensive and safe thorium-related technologies to finally make the petroleum energy age a relic of the past. So that was the summary of my paper 10 years ago. They tabled it. They said, well, we'll table it and look at it in the future. And 10 years have passed. So anyhow, so let's get back to the thorium battle now. We're going to look at 59 through 63. In late 50s, thorium gains a new champion. And as you can guess, it was Dr. Alvin Weinberg with Senator John Kennedy discussing Galt in 1959. Here's where Johnson comes in. And Chester Holyfield. Kennedy didn't want Johnson as his vice president. He had a guy from Missouri, but Johnson blackmailed Kennedy that FBI, J. Edgar Hoover had a folder with all the gals he had slept with and said, if you don't put Johnson on the team, you won't get the presidency. Nixon will. So he had to rescind the guy from Missouri he had offered it to and give it to Johnson. So all these little things going on behind the scene. But once Johnson's in place, remember the three people handshakes. One of the guys isn't going to survive it, and it's John F. Kennedy. So he's knocked out. So let's look at 1969 through 1978. They took Glenn Seaborg out in 1971. Nixon is now president, Tricky Dick, and they wanted him out. And this is all going on in '72 with Saudi Arabia. Edward Pauly and Aramco has all the oil in Saudi Arabia, and it has exploded. It's phenomenal the amount of oil they found. But Iraq has just nationalized its oil, and the American companies are scared to death that Saudi Arabia is going to nationalize. They need to blackmail them. That's why they can't get rid of Alvin Weinberg yet in '71. They have to hold him on, and they didn't hide the thorium reactor yet because Edward Pauly has been telling Saudi Arabia, if you don't do business with us, we're going to let the thorium chemical reactor go forward, and all you guys will be back in tents with your camels again. So before firing Dr. Weinberg and completely shutting down thorium, both were bargaining chips with OPEC against nationalizing Aramco. When they got rid of Glenn Seaborg, they put in James Schlesinger, who was Atomic Energy Commissioner for 2 years. Then he became head of CIA and then Department of Defense. He has the yellow circle around him. He's not a good guy. Anyway, well, they got rid of Alvin Weinberg in '72. Dr. Weinberg's firing triggers OPEC's purchase of Aramco instead of nationalizing it, and the end of President Kennedy's dream for a thorium-powered America. I'm putting triple X's on the 1940s thorium all-star team. Alvin was the last holdout, and unfortunately, Alvin or John Galt is gone. Now, here's where the treason came in, and this is thanks again to Linda Miner from Harvard to Enron. Her 4-page article and stuff I saw from a lot of other outfits and piecing it together. So in 1972, Chess Holyfield fires Dr. Alvin Weinberg from Oak Ridge National Laboratories and orders an immediate stop by everyone involved with the thorium molten salt reactor.
Were either of you present when the molten salt reactor program was canceled in the early 70s?
Yeah, we were still working there.
I was still working on the system. We were still finalizing reports on the performance of the MSRE.
Sid, how did you feel when it was announced that the program was canceled? Did it come as a surprise, or was it something that you saw coming?
I didn't see it coming. And yes, it was a surprise, but I was not privy to the politics at the time.
The original shutdown came early in 1972 with a letter from Mr. Shaw that says, "Thou shalt stop right now." And one anecdote that I heard, and I don't know personally, said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you put your hand on your desk on one side, take everything that has to do with molten salt, sweep it off, and you're finished."
They wanted it to disappear. They had made their agreement with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, because now I'm going to show. Have you heard the term quid pro quo?
Yeah.
Okay. at the end of this page, you can tell me if you see anything that looks like pro quo. 72, they get rid of Dr. Alvin Weinberg. Early 73, Middle East countries make first payment to Edward Pauli's companies of 25% for America's big oil holdings, Aramco, in the Middle East. It just one of those coincidences. Chet Holyfield's agents order Oak Ridge National Laboratory's 7.5 megawatt molten salt thorium reactor technology be padlocked in its building and not be disturbed or cleaned out. They just wanted it to disappear. Scientists involved in the multi-year research were disbanded or fired. A falsified document, which we talked about in part one, WASH 1222, was filed indicating thorium research was a failure. To add insult to injury, Holyfield staffers renamed Oak Ridge National Laboratories. It becomes Holyfield National Laboratories. That was eventually reversed. That was too ugly. But once they closed everything up, December 1973, Organization for Petroleum Export Countries, OPEC, decides to triple the international price of crude oil. They know the competition is gone. There won't be any molten salt thorium reactor, or what I call a GALT chemical reactor. 1974, Middle East countries make second payment to Edward Pauli's companies of an additional 35% of American big oil holdings, Aramco, in their countries. 1978, 3 Mile Island accident occurs. Remember, I mentioned how they were ramming an inferior technology down the American public. They did a lot of shortcuts. They were hoping for a Fukushima kind of accident. This was just a partial meltdown, but it still imploded the nuclear industry. There were at least 40 plans on paper that were canceled that day of 3 Mile Island. So what happens? 1980, the Middle East countries make final payment to Edward Pauli's companies for the 40% balance of debt on America's big oil, Aramco, holdings in their countries. So let me see if I got this straight. They fired Alvin Weinberg and stopped the molten reactor. Suddenly, Middle East pays for 25%. That's probably a coincidence. That's green. They tripled the price of oil, and they've got a document, and they've fired all the people related to thorium and nuclear, and by 74, Nixon has resigned, Holyfield has been told to resign, and Hosmer, the three key people for squashing thorium, have resigned. And suddenly, I call this yellow. This is another coincidence. I can't be a bid pro quo. And then 3 Mile Island, a failure finally happens, which pretty much takes nuclear out as a competitor. And it's after that Saudi Arabia and OPEC pay for the balance of Aramco. This may have added up to more than $1 trillion back then. That went unreported to government agencies. So Dr. Alvin Weinberg and Raiders of the Thorium Hammer, again, Thor's hammers, when I did this. This is just an excerpt of something I did before, where, again, I've read Alvin Weinberg's books, Nuclear Reactions, Science and Transscience. Dr. Alvin Weinberg, again, is the inventor of the thorium chemical reactor, but also the pressurized light water nuclear reactor fueled with uranium. So he's got knowledge. He's the top expert on all this stuff. And I just want to mention, as all this stuff, it's not that I've thought it up on my own. It's just taking bits and pieces from all these different individuals, even Chester Holyfield's book and Oppenheimer and the Prize, a Pulitzer Prize book, The Irregulars, Linda Miner's from Harvard to Enron, Cult of the Atom, Thorium, Jerry Voorhees, Kid Atlas's book, Rayburn, Dixie Lee Ray, who was Atomic Energy Commissioner. She got on board as the commissioner, unfortunately, right after Alvin had been fired. They would have made a great team, and she was trying to figure out what was going on there. I've written a lot about that in the past. And again, John Kennedy's versus the Empire. All these things contribute to some of the things you're going to see here. And it's the year 1972. This is from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Alvin will be Harrison Ford. That guy's Chet Holyfield. And again, Chet only had a sixth grade education. He was a sixth grade educated haberdasher before and after being chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. A clothing salesman fired Alvin Weinberg, and then when he was released, he went back to selling clothes again. And there's Sam Rayburn, who was Speaker of the House. It was him and Ed and Johnson that went to Kennedy, saying you've got to put Johnson on the team. And then we have Edward Pauley, the oil banking puppet master. Anyway, as it was said earlier, Chet was clearly exasperated with Weinberg, and he finally blurted out, "Alvin, if you are so concerned about safety of reactors, then I think it may be time for you to leave the nuclear energy industry." Again, a clothing salesman telling the most brilliant guy in nuclear energy, thorium and light water, saying, if you think safety is an issue, you're in the wrong place. Well, he was right, and they knew it. They wanted a problem. Alvin was ordered to take a leave of absence and quietly retire as head of Oak Ridge National Laboratories. If Alvin refused the request, Holyfield would invoke 35 U.S. Code 186 penalty for Alvin's informing Ralph Nader about the flaws in the pressurized light water reactor cooling system. That's Ralph Nader. He ran for president one time as Green candidate. His book here, Breaking Through Power, that has many meanings. Dr. Weinberg now had two choices because he tried to warn the public and he broke the national security rules. Dr. Weinberg could either watch the uranium nuclear plant implode from federal prison, or they offered him a way out. They said, take a sabbatical, walk away, have a good life, and don't come back. And he chose the latter. He walked away. Just like John Galt did in Atlas Shrugged. Dr. Weinberg asks about the thorium molten salt reactor, and here we go.
We have top men working on it right now. Who? Top men.
And it has top secret on it, just like Ayn Rand's screenplay, Top Secret. But anyway. I would say there's at least 6,500 crates there, all thanks to the National Security Act. Sometimes in movies, they like to tell you the truth, expecting you to be skeptical about it. More than 30 years would pass before NASA scientist Kirk Sorensen would rediscover the work of Dr. Alvin Weinberg. As noted earlier, this is just one of thousands of remarkable technologies kept from American public since 1951 due to the corrupt Congress and the White House passing of that bill. And so that was question one. The more laissez-faire energy market, how do you think thorium would compete against fossil fuels, renewables, and conventional nuclear? Well, first of all, as Eric would say,
all right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.
FK has spoken enthusiastically of thorium in speeches as late as 2026. That's when he got taken out. In the speech, Kennedy said all Americans by the end of the 20th century, all electricity would be produced from thorium, a transformative technology. It would change mankind's future at time. Thanks to the American exceptionalism, the age of atomic thorium was going to carry man to the heavens and beyond. President Kennedy was murdered 27 days after the speech. And there's references to the stuff. So we got to start by getting rid of the Fed. Question 3, do you see a path for thorium within the current regulatory framework, or does your analysis suggest we need a more radical rollback of modern regulatory state?
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.
What are the most common objections and misconceptions you encountered about thorium, and how do you address them? Opponents of Galt chemical reactors express concern about the initial molten salt corrosion of the chemical reactor containment metals. Key congressmen in 1974 coerced the EPA and Congress to legislate thorium was too dangerous to process in the U.S. and that no future research should be conducted on thorium energy too. There were two separate solutions to the initial molten salt corrosion issue. One, all you had to do was prevent water moisture from contaminating the molten salt. That's what was attacking the thorium reactor they had back in the 60s. If it had continued for another year or two, there's going to be corrosion and so forth. But it was really the moisture in the salt that was doing it. The other possibility was a different alloy, and that's what Norway's doing right now. They're using a slightly different alloy, which doesn't have that issues. Plus, they can put it in a vacuum system where there's no moisture, so it benefits from both. So both have been successfully accomplished in China and Denmark for Galt chemical reactors, presently operational tests today. So the scientists back in the 60s says that's not a problem. We just use a certain steel alloy. We've done our tests and we know what to do. But the naysayers back then were saying, "Oh, this is awful," and there's no solution. That anything they could use to try and throw a wet blanket on the thorium system, especially if the wet blanket had a lot of moisture to help corrode the steel alloy. So, paint a picture of if thorium had been widely adopted, starting in say the 70s. What might our energy landscape look like today? So here's what I put together there. Whereas inexpensive Galt technology would have likely lowered the national cost of energy from 6% to 4% versus the national gross product between 73 and 2024, foreign oil dependency with the rise of OPEC led to an average cost of 8% versus the gross national product. This also contributed to 6 recessions between 1973 and 2006. If you remember, excuse me, once they knew thorium was being, that the the inventor had been fired. They had fired the employees, and they had put the thorium behind the vault. They immediately tripled the price of OPEC oil. So all these things were driving prices up. If I looked at the GNP over the 50 years, the difference between if it had been 4% as opposed to going to 8% amounts to $40 trillion in additional costs, and actually exceeds the national deficit right now, which is I think 37, 38 trillion. So we got screwed royally. How did $100 trillion market thorium and rare earth metals end up in China? The EPA was created under Nixon in 1970 to eventually outlaw the processing of any material exhibiting radioactivity, no matter how slight. Even though thorium is less radioactive than potassium in the human body, if my spouse was sleeping beside me right now, but she's in Ohio, she puts off more radiation than the thorium does. It's not till you hit the thorium with the neutron that it starts acting. So it's very inert till then. That's why its half-life is like 14 billion years. So the EPA outlawed both thorium and other rare earth metals because rare earth metals was found. Rare earth metals and thorium are found together. That they said, okay, they're all guilty by association, and so ultimately rare earth metals was shipped off to China. We were 50 years ahead of everybody. The manufacturers and patent holders scream bloody murder. This is treason. Our smart bombs, everything else depend on rare earth metals. We're so far ahead of everyone. And now we had to sell the patents 10 cents on the dollar to the Chinese so they could take it over. All thanks to Nixon and the Bushes and the plans to transfer all this technology to China and make us a third world nation by the time, well, it was supposed to be around the time Hillary was supposed to have won the presidency. The Bolshevik Revolution was 1917. If Hillary had been in, there was a chance they were going to have the equivalent of a Bolshevik Revolution here on the 100-year anniversary. So we dodged a bullet there. Anyway, continuing on. Additional comments. In 2000, 54 years after Ayn Rand scribbled, "Who is John Galt?" Ohio NASA physicist Kirk Sorensen discovered a thorium molten salt reactor abandoned behind the vaulted laboratory wall of one of the old Manhattan Project laboratories at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Under NASA's Security Act of 1947, any knowledge of thorium and Galt technology could be hidden from the American public. Now, you were asking how things would have changed, and that's what we're going to do here. Here's a chart of the price of oil going from the 1800s to 2009 or whatever. Now, I know this chart's hard to see, so let's make it a little bigger. Let's explore the graph on the next slide. Here we go. Can you see this better?
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Okay, good. Anyway, so long history of oil prices. Here was when thorium was discovered, 1942. Here's 1953, where we tested the small phase 1. Here's 64 through 69, where we tested the 50 times larger thorium reactor, the 7,500 kilowatt. Here's 1970, when Galt was canceled, actually December 31st, 1969, but I'm going to call it 1970. It's close enough. Well, it was at midnight, so I'm splitting a minute. Then 1978, 3 Mile Island accident implodes the nuclear industry. oil prices explode. OPEC rises. So you can see the move upwards. What did Congressman Voorhees, Kid Atlas, envision for America in 46 and President Kennedy in 1962 with the commercialization of Galt chemical reactors? If Galt chemical reactors had been introduced in the early 1970s, this would have happened. There's your oil. It would almost return to what it was before, because one of the things with oil, and my specialty was in energy industry, is anytime oil reaches capacity of 80% drilling, you need minimum of 80% to supply demand. They can dictate prices, and they can skyrocket. Anytime oil falls under 80%, it can collapse. It went from $150 or so in the 90s to, by 1999, it fell to $10 a barrel. And the reason was it warmed up. It got warmer. And so people didn't need as much energy to warm things. So it fell under 80% and collapsed. Now, if you think this out, the oil industry and the environmentalists say warm is bad. We need cold. No, it's the oil industry funding people to have the mindset that warm is bad, because once we hit the mini ice age again or go in the other direction, and everyone's cut out coal, they've cut out oil, they've cut out all these things. They have solar and wind that won't work. Oil will come back and be hundreds of dollars a barrel or whatever. So it's just the mindset of how they manipulate our thoughts. So anyway, that's what would have happened to oil in the 70s and beyond. As opposed to U.S. experiencing, excuse me, a 50% reduction in energy costs, the oil industry increased revenues $1 trillion a year on average since the 1970s. That gets back to that $40 trillion that we pay, $1 trillion more a year because we did not have the thorium. OPEC and terrorism would not go global. They wouldn't have had the money for it, except for eliminating the Galt chemical reactor. So many things in this world have changed because of what transpired there. How did the global elites benefit by the bait and switch? By sabotaging and eliminating nuclear energy as a viable competitor to petroleum, the deep state raised the price of oil many times over. I'll just leave this up here. People can read it if they haven't fallen asleep yet. And let's see. Since thorium spent fuel was not viable material for nuclear arms race, such a race might never have been launched. The deep state defense industry achieved almost $9 trillion in nuclear weapons buildup between the 40s and the 80s. Here's us. Don't forget the Russians, but I don't know how much of their money didn't come from the U.S. taxpayers either. Most of the 129 plus pressurized light water reactor facilities constructed between the mid-50s through the 1990s were secretly built by deep state operatives. If the average cost in construction of an operation for 60 years of a 1,000 megawatt plant is estimated at $4.9 billion in present 1970 dollars, America spent about $500 billion over a 60-year period. Had Galt been selected for the same physical load, the costs and operating costs to the American economy would have been only $54 billion, 10 times less. The deep state increased their profits with pressurized light water reactor from $5.4 billion, if they're getting 10%, let's say, conservative 10%, to $54 billion profit by going with a light water reactor. So it's just even the construction, and no one has talked about if you ever decommission and take them apart. Main Yankee, it cost twice as much to take it down as it was to build it. So this is all the kind of stuff that I've known over time that's going on, and you don't get angry or upset. You just know what the facts are, and again, it's amazing all the things going around us, and I think there's a lot of positive things going on. I think Trump and others are trying to blow by this and so forth. How did the elites benefit from the bait and switch? Well, this is from the Cult of the Atom. The deep state companies provided enriched uranium at prices of $50,000 per kilogram. Thorium is around $300 per kilogram. By selling 20% of uranium to Russia, they will be able to significantly increase 235 enrichment costs. I'm just going to pop these up here. Sword of Damocles, if deep state wishes to destroy the United States, take down the electric grid for more than 3 months. When backup generators run out of fuel, hundreds of Fukushima's events occur all over the U.S. from lack of cooling. So they really set us up over the years, and this is why thorium would have been so amazing. Okay, question 6. How do you think global geopolitics would be cheap if cheap, dense, relative, clean thorium-based energy were ubiquitous? Well, this is the image I showed on the first page. Here's looking at the history of nuclear here. I put this together a while ago. It's a book I was working on. It's got about 1,500 pages of facts in it and about 1,000 electronic reference points. But anyway, if we go on thorium, and here we have Kid Atlas, Ayn Rand, Alvin Weinberg, Kennedy. We have our rare earth metals, Kirk Sorensen. And what happens is this way, where our energy is advancing, we're a type 1 civilization, we're on the moon and Mars, and eventually we're Star Trekking by 2100 because we got all the energy we need to do all these things. Here's what I contend the bad guys want. With uranium, and we have Churchill, Edward Pauley, Chester Holyfield, LBJ, everything going to China, Saudi Arabia with high oil prices. Nixon was on the bad team for a while. He got sick and tired of Chester Holyfield. He brought on Dixie Ray Lee and was trying to figure out how to make things right. And that's when they kicked his ass out of the office. They didn't trust him any longer. But the route they want, we had the towers coming down. We've got global cooling coming again. And by 2035, if we don't do a crash course and find the right kind of energies, we'll collapse back to a 0-1 civilization again, a reset like they did a couple of hundred years ago with the Tartarian Empire. Number 7, in a future where thorium is embraced, what kind of economic and cultural impact do you envision? The fact that thorium has been delayed more than 50 years. To avoid a major global crisis in the next few years, see Cliff High's video. We need to eliminate U.S. Code 35181. People should see this video. It's very helpful. Remember from an earlier section at the end of the fiscal year 2025, there were 6,543 secret orders in effect on patent applications. The Trump administration should consider releasing as many non-destructive technologies to the world as possible. We also don't want to forget.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.
Now, he's done about 200 podcasts, and he says that at the end of each one. So this is only 2 or 3 times. What surprised you the most in your research for the presentation, either about thorium or about Rand's relevance to today's energy database? Daniel Ford's book, published in 1982, the same year Ayn Rand died of cancer. Through the Freedom of Information Act, Daniel Ford exposed how key politicians controlled by the banksters were doing everything possible to select the worst nuclear technology, ram it down American public's throat, and hope hundreds of thousands of citizens would eventually be harmed or killed by an accident. This would eliminate a competitor and yield greater profits for the personal energy monopolies. Thorium was so secretive in '82, it was not even mentioned even once in the Freedom of Information Act papers released to Daniel Ford. So that was my surprise. Number 9, has working on this topic changed how you read Atlas Shrugged or how you view current policy fights? Ayn Rand bragged of her novels being like an airplane with 3 motors. On May 18, 1934, 29-year-old Ayn Rand wrote a letter to Kenneth McGowan, a film producer and director. He did Little Women and got an Academy Award for it. Katharine Hepburn was in that. And she wrote, if the plot of the story is simple and understandable enough to be interesting alone by itself, or even to the lowest type of mentality, if it has the plain elements, it can appeal to all, and if, at the same time, the plot carries a deeper meaning, a significance which can be reached only by the highest, then the problem is solved. I must emphasize once more that it is not merely a matter of plain story for the sake of the lowbrow, artistically presented for the sake of the highbrow. It's a matter of a plot, the story, the very meat of the film arranged ingeniously enough to satisfy both. This is from Letters of Ayn Rand. She wrote, is there any reason why a story cannot be built in such a way that it is convincing and interesting to those who cannot analyze it, and yet just as convincing to those who can? This is an airplane carrying 3 motors. Still, those who still want to go further, and this is what I was saying she did with Atlas Shrugged, such is my theory of building a story in tears. It is, in a way, the same principle as that of an airplane carried by 3 motors. If 2 of them failed, the third one is still enough to carry the plane safely. That is the principle which I have applied to every story I have written so far, but I have never developed it as plainly and obviously as I and say so as skillfully as in Red Pond. Also, I have never had a chance to attempt to explain my theory to anyone as I have done it here. I have no doubt that it will work, no doubt, but also no proof, for I have not seen it tried yet. Essentially, she was talking about how she felt she could write a book in a way that something would have to happen to trigger a discovery of a third motor. Truth might be waiting for some real world event to highlight and expose. And it's because she had built in that story that I showed in part 2. And she hoped no one would figure it out till after her life ended. Because if people figured out there was a third story in there, or something she was trying to get out, as I was showing in part 2. I contend when Oppenheimer and her got together, that's in another story I've written. He said I'm giving you this information if you can find some way to use your 3-level book so that if the technology is ever rediscovered, people can look at your book again and see it has a totally different message in it. So that was number 9. Number 10 here. What's the one question about thorium and Rand you wish people would ask but almost never do? How did the butterfly effect come into play between thorium and Atlas Shrugged? By that, in 1926, how did the butterfly effect ultimately bring a 21-year-old Russian escapee, Alessa Rosenbaum, to a small Chicago neighborhood where an 11-year-old boy named Alvin Weinberg resided? Is it just coincidental that 20 years later, as Dr. Alvin Weinberg works on the secret Atoms for Peace nuclear program involving thorium at a secret East Coast Manhattan Project laboratory involved with thorium, at the same time, Ayn Rand begins her last novel on September 2nd with these 4 words: "Who is John Galt?" And the thing is, John Galt and Alvin Weinberg, who's a relative of hers, have the same bio. I have the same bio in the book as he did in real life. Butterfly effect. The butterfly effect rests on the notion that the world is deeply interconnected, such that one little occurrence can influence a much larger complex system. So here was a case where Alvin Weinberg, it has to deal with Alvin Weinberg first anyway. It was one of a distant relative of Ayn Rand that came over here in 1897. In 1899, the husband comes over, and it's that Eva Levinson, a brilliant girl illegally taught to read and write by her father at a young age prior to his death. Russian cousins fear she would be executed if Russian government learned she was teaching others. They shipped her to a family in America in 1907 at age 15. That's Alvin Weinberg's mother, Emma, and history of that. And of course, he does Atoms for Peace and so forth. What happened was Alicia Rosenbaum, or Ayn Rand, spends the winter of the 21st birthday on a passenger ship in U.S. And essentially, she's related to Alvin Weinberg, and they meet in Chicago. And so in the book, she talks about John Galt, that when he was 11, he disappeared, and he's seen again at age 16, going to college as one of the youngest kids. Ayn Rand was in Chicago with Alvin Weinberg when he was 11, turning 12. She left before he turned 12. And so what's happened is once she got involved with Top Secret, she discovered that Alvin Weinberg was a big deal in the atomic industry, and she decided to write the story around him and all the individuals around him, but she gave him different names and stuff.
So the gaps in his life are basically representative of like when she didn't know him. So like it starts off when he was younger because that's when she knew him. Then it picks up again when she also knew of him in college, and then of course during the interviews with.
Yep.
Pretty crazy.
And so I've said to people, it'd be great if I had an imagination to do things like this, but not really. It's just I'm following the facts. And then last minute title change. Oh, she had called it Mind on Strike up to the very end, and then she changed it to Atlas Shrugged, and that was because Kid Atlas, Jerry Voorhees, she was using Atlas Shrugged as a title, but at the end she changed it to that as another clue because Jerry Voorhees, being Kid Atlas and all the things he tried to do to help the energy field and so forth, and he was described Kid Atlas, and he always tried to put the poor on his shoulders and so forth, and he lived in the same district as her or adjacent to it, so she knew all about him and how he was good friends with Alvin Weinberg and so forth, so a relative. So Jerry Ford's, aka Kid Atlas, shrugged off. Oh, there was a point in time where once Richard Nixon decided no longer run for House, but run for U.S. Senate, that's just as a senator, he was going to be picked by Eisenhower as the vice president. So Jerry Voorhees, aka Kid Atlas, shrugged off any consideration of taking on Nixon for his old congressional seat in '48, and I contend that's when Ayn Rand decided to. She couldn't say Kid Atlas because that would be too noticeable, but the fact that he shrugged when considering running for his old office again, she at the last moment changed the title to Atlas Shrugged. As time passed, I came. Oh, that's just some other stuff there. We'll just I think.
Is it a wonderful life? Who is John Galt? Prologue. To enjoy a classic detective mystery, you need a body and plenty of suspects. On January 6, 1946, on the third-year anniversary death of his friend and inventor, Nicholas Tesla, Detective Mike Hammer got a possible homicide call from a team of forensic scientists. During the excavation in the backyard of a large family estate, an underground bunker structure was uncovered. The body of a middle-aged man was found behind what appeared to be prison bars. Detective Hammer was called to the scene to investigate. After a thorough examination of the crime scene and the recovery of some pieces of evidence, astonishing facts surfaced. It appears local police had solved a missing persons cold case from May 30th, 1917. A 10-year-old boy named George Bailey had disappeared without a trace. Present evidence suggested the kidnapped victim had been imprisoned within the confines of the large, reasonably comfortable bunker cell for the last 29 years. While there was a sink, toilet, kitchen, bed, and small library of books and magazines behind the confined bunker bars, an autopsy confirmed George Bailey died of starvation. Circumstantial evidence suggested Bailey died sometime in June of 1942. This estimate was suggested by Potterville Hospital records, which confirmed Mr. Henry F. Potter, owner of the estate, suffered and died of a massive heart attack on May 30th, 1942. Potter's body was found slumped in his wheelchair in the kitchen. There was a cake on his lap with a single, unlit candle and the phrase, "When a million," written in faded, moldy blue icing. The on-scene detective's notes from 4 years earlier indicated everyone was baffled by this unusual scene. An explanation was never found, that is, until now. Unfortunately, the prime kidnapping suspect was now resting in peace under a great tombstone in Potterville Cemetery. Potter's descendants, who had only grown richer, more powerful, and famous, indicated they were never privy to the business affairs of their family benefactor. Folklore had it that Potter could see future timelines and knew how to act on them. Rumor had it that Potter cashed out all his stocks just prior to the big crash of '29. He ended up buying all of Bedford Falls and soon after renamed it Potterville. Sadly, Mike Hammer quickly learned that anyone else associated closely with the case was now deceased, apart from a writer named Philip Van Doren Stern, age 45. When contacted, he issued a nervous no comment over the phone. The investigation dragged on into December. Mike Hammer learned the very same writer, Philip Stern, was indeed an author, editor, and Civil War historian. He lived briefly in Bedford Falls just a few years after the kidnapping. He apparently did some poking around in 1920 to see if there was a story he could write about. Hammer looked down at the free movie ticket pass he had been given. A few years earlier, the author had sold a story he published to a movie studio. It was originally called The Greatest Gift. It was now being released this evening, December 20th, 1946. The movie title had been changed. It was now called It's a Wonderful Life. Leaving the theater after the movie ending credits began to roll, Mike Hammer came out looking pale and a little shaken. He turned his head back toward the couples now exiting the theater. Their faces glowed with smiles and tears. They were holding each other's arms for warmth and comfort. Hammer shook his head, trying to clear away his dark thoughts about the similarities between Tesla and Bailey. Could it be this easy for evil people to change present and future history? If George Bailey had not been kidnapped, would Potterville have remained Bedford Heights as it did in the movie? Would the world be a better place today? Maybe so. The only character who ended up miserable in the movie was Potter. Hammer then thought about all the suppressed inventions of his former friend, Tesla. Most of the public would never know about this amazing man. The elites would make certain history would forget Tesla. Whenever a Tesla invention threatened a secret monopoly of the elites, it was suppressed, sabotaged, or stolen. Like George Bailey in the picture show, Tesla didn't really care about wealth and fame. Tesla wanted to restore the world to his vision of a forgotten time of peace and plenty for all. It was not to be. Hammer had heard through the grapevine Tesla's death was actually a homicide through suffocation. Powerful Wall Street elites ordered the death be declared of natural causes. How might the world have changed if Tesla's wireless electricity invention had been adopted in 1901 like his alternating current had been? There would likely have been no World War I or World War II. There would be 200 million more people enjoying a life of peace and plenty. Could a small group of global elite bankers actually deny humanity the future Tesla envisioned for them? Mike Hammer stepped away from the theater. He felt an ill wind laugh at the perspiration which had begun beading on his forehead. He pulled his hat snug. Buttoning up his coat, he shrugged his shoulders nervously as a cold chill ran through his body. He decided he would close the George Bailey case file in the morning. Best he pursues crimes he could investigate and solve. There were no longer any kidnappers or possibly pedophiles associated with this case who were alive. Who could he throw in jail? This case was far beyond his pay grade and expertise. He was friends with a Russian female author who enjoyed reading about real-life mysteries, and she had just begun working on a new novel September 2nd. He was having coffee with her in the near future. Maybe he would tell her about the strange case he was closing. With that, Mike Hammer turned and disappeared into the dark, frigid night mumbling, "Who is John Galt?" The anonymous patriot condor.
So that's just kind of showing how what would have happened if we had the Galt chemical reactor 50 years ago. There's people out there that want us with less than more. So and let's see, I think that's it. Final observation. There's very little difference between actors and politicians. Each take their cues from powerful directors behind the camera. The attractive puppets perform in Hollywood. The uglier ones are relegated to Washington, D.C. And so that's pretty much the end of it. That I think Ayn Rand's anthem is about energy technology that was crushed in prior generations. Then you have Atlas Shrugged, which is talking about the battle today. And sometime down the road, there might be a book on what Ayn Rand tried to write and was stopped. So, and it'd be about thorium. So
that wraps up part 3 of Thorium's Atlas Shrugged moment. I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did, and a special thanks to Mike Brakey, aka the Anonymous Patriot Condor, for putting together this wonderful presentation and sharing the incredible story of Thorium with us. However, this is only the beginning, and there is still much of the Thorium story that is yet to be unlocked, but we're going to save that for another day. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week.